Hello guys and welcome back to our database course. So in this video, we'll be starting with nulls. So let's see what nulls are exactly, right? So what is a null, right? What is a null? So normally when you think about null, you might think that, okay, maybe it is the zero value. Okay, maybe it's a blank string, but that's not what it is, right? That is not true. That is not what it is. What it is the absence, right? It is absence of anything. It is not zero. It is just a blank space, right? It's a blank space. That is all it is. It's not a blank string. It's a blank space, right? It simply means absence of anything, right? It means that that information, the one that we're looking for, just straight up does not exist. All right. So let's see why nulls are there, right? So what can be the reason for a null to exist? So our first reason is that that particular value that we are looking for is not available to us, right? So maybe that information exists, but it is not made available to us. For example, my email password exists, but it is not available for anybody to look at, right? It exists, but it won't be available for anybody else. All right, so that was our first case. Then we have our another case that it is unknown, right? It is unknown. So maybe there's some value that is unknown, right? So what this means can be divided into two parts, right? The first part can be that we don't know whether the value exists, right? We don't know whether the value exists. And the second part could be we know that the value exists, but we don't know what its value is, right? So let's take an example for both of those, right? So for example, a person's date of birth, right? A person's date of birth, we know that it exists, but we might not necessarily know what it is, right? So in a database, there could be some empty DOBs, and that does not mean that this person does not have a date of birth, right? He has a date of birth, obviously, but we don't know what that is. All right. So for the part where it does not exist, we can take the example of Aadhaar number, right? Some people might not have an Aadhaar, and they would not have an Aadhaar number. So we don't know if this particular field would exist for everybody or not. All right. So moving on to our third case, and that is not applicable. That is not applicable. So this basically means that this field is irrelevant for this record. So let's say we had a database of people, right? Like we did in our DOB example and our Aadhaar example. And let's take a record that is of some foreigner. And we are asking what is his Aadhaar number. This field would be not applicable, right? This field would be not applicable. There could be many such things. So for example, we could have a record, a table for bank users, and we can have one attribute for credit card number. And there might be some people who don't have a credit card, so that particular field for them is not applicable, right? They don't care about that field. All right, so let's move on and see how nulls are handled, right? How nulls are handled. So in our SQL, in our SQL, in our SQL, we have something called three valued logic, right? Three valued logic. And what that means is that we have three answers for any logical statement. A logical statement can be true, it can be false, or it may be unknown. So what I'm trying to say is, let's take an example and maybe that makes it clearer, right? So 5 greater than 6. This is what? This is false, right? Very clearly false. Then I can have another logical expression that might say 6 equals to 3 into 2, and this would be what? True. However, in SQL we say that there's a third type, that is unknown. We don't know whether the value would be true or false, right? So this third situation arises mainly for our nulls, right? So let's see how that would happen. So as I said, null is what? Null is absence of anything, right? So what if I were to say 5 greater than null? Now, this null implies absence, right? That means this could have been anything. It might have been 6, it might have been 7, it might have been 2. That means that we don't know whether 5 greater than null is false, false or is true, right? We don't know that. And that is why we use unknown, right? So I hope unknown was clear, right? Unknown simply means, look, there are three answers to any logical expression. That is either it is true or it is false, or there's a third answer that is unknown, right? We don't know whether it is true or false. It may be true, it may be false, depending on the situation. All right. So moving on, let's see how our nulls would react. Let's see how our nulls would react with our logical operators, right? So that is our and, or, and not. Let's see what happens. So let's take and first, right? And let's take true and false. So what happens when I have true and false? What happens when I have true and false, right? And does what? And checks my first condition and it checks my second condition, and it says when both are true, only then will your output be true. In all other situations, it is false, right? So when one is true, one is false, my answer is what? My answer is what? False, right? When one is true and the other one is also true, my answer is what? True. What would happen if I have true and null? I mean, not null. Well, it won't be null, it would be unknown, right? We are comparing logics here, right? So there would be an expression with a null and that would have given you unknown, right? So we will elaborate a little bit on this. So let's try to find out what this would be. So true and unknown. Unknown, as I said, could be anything, right? It could have been true, it could have been false, right? So in this situation, let's try to see what our output would have been. So if it were to be true, my answer would have been what? True, right? True is true. If it were to be false, my answer would have been true, false, false, right? And what this says is it might be true, it might be false, and that means that it is simply unknown, right? So I said this is not null. I hope that was clear, right? I hope that was clear. I said that this is not null, it is unknown, right? And I said that it is caused due to an expression that contained null, right? So true would be what? 5 equal to 5. Maybe we are trying to check a condition in which we are checking 5 equals to 5 and null greater than 5, right? This would result in unknown, this would result in true. So it has to be something like that. But the output of this is going to be what? Unknown, right? Output of this is going to be what? True. We are comparing two logical outputs here, right? Hopefully that was clear, right? So that was for a true and unknown, right? So true and unknown causes unknown with and. So let's try out the same thing with false. So let's take false. We have false and false, and that gives us what? False. We have false and true, and that gives us what? False, right? We are checking both for true, right? And both are not true. That means our output would be false. So what would happen if I had false and unknown? What would happen if I had false and unknown, right? Again, unknown could have been true, it could have been false, right? What would have happened if it was true? So false and true is what? False and true is what? False, right? And false is what? That is also false, right? So no matter what unknown would have been, my answer has to have been false, right? So false and unknown would result in a false. I hope this is clear why this is happening, right? Unknown could have been anything. It might have been true, it might have been false, but it does not matter what unknown could have been. What matters is the output in both the situations results to a false, right? If it was true, my answer would have been false. If it was false, my answer would have been false. That means I don't care about this unknown. The answer must have been false, right? So hopefully that was clear. Let's take the case of unknown. So let's take unknown. So we already know what unknown and true does, right? And we already know what unknown and false does, right? Do we know what unknown and unknown would give us? Right? So let's check that out. So what was unknown and true giving us? Unknown and true gave us unknown. Unknown and false gave us what? False. So again, unknown could have been either true, either false, right? So unknown could have been either true or false, right? If it were to be true, my answer would have been what? Unknown, right? If it were to be false, my answer would have been what? False, right? So I don't know what my answer would have been, and that simply means that my answer would have been unknown, right? Whenever I don't know, whenever I cannot reach a conclusion, I know that my answer must be unknown. All right, so unknown and unknown will also give us unknown, right? Let's move on to OR operation. Let's move on to our OR operation. So what OR does is checks if either one is true, right? If anything is true, it would say what? Your output is true. So let's take an example. Let's continue with the process and say true, or let's use a bar for it. True or true gives me what? True, right? Because either this should be true or this should be true. If they're both true, even then the answer would be true. It checks for what? If either one is false. Sorry, if both of them are false, only then would it return a false, right? If both of them are false, only then would I get a false. In all other situations, I'm going to get a true. All right. So moving on, we get true for true and true. Let's see what happens when I have true or false. So what happens? It sees the true and it says your output must be true. All right, because one of them is true. So what would happen if my other partner was unknown? In that situation, I am again going to say that this unknown might have been true. It might have been false. All right. So true with true would have given me true, and true with false would also have given me true. So I don't care about this, right? So long as this is true, my answer is going to be true. Right. So true with unknown is going to give me what? A true. All right. Let's move on to our false. So if I have false or true, what happens? I get a true, right? Because one of them is true. What happens if I have a false or false? In this situation, none of them are true, and that is why I would get a false. And the main question was, what would happen if I have false or unknown? So again, let's split it up and let's say our unknown might have been true or it might have been false. Right. So false with true would have given me what? A true. And false with false would have given me false, right? And that means that I could not come to a solution, which means I do not know my answer, and therefore it is what? Unknown, right? So false with unknown is going to give me unknown. This is wrong, right? False with unknown is going to give me unknown. All right. This idea of splitting up unknown into true or false and checking if we converge on one answer is the best way you can ever get out of any confusion between how a null would be behaving in some certain situation, right? Just split it up into two, and if your answer converges to one output, then you know what your answer is going to be. If it does not converge into one answer, then you know that answer is unknown. All right, so let's move on to the easier part and let's finish it up with not. So not is easy, right? So we have a true, we have a false, and we have an unknown, right? And we not it. So true becomes false, false becomes true. And again, I said unknown might be true, it might be false, it might be true, it might be false. Therefore, my answer could be, if this was true, my answer would have been false. If this was false, my answer would have been true, right? That means I do not know what my answer is. Therefore, my answer must be unknown, right? So not of unknown is going to give me unknown. Hopefully that was clear. You would understand this much better if you try it out yourself, right? If you try this out yourself and run some queries on some database site. We would be doing a practical after this. So try to follow along and see how null reacts with all the different things, right? Try it out, feel it for yourself, and we'll meet in the next video.